You don't belong here. Move along." The young soldier waved dismissively like brushing off a stray leaf. The old man said nothing. He simply lowered his eyes, adjusted the grip on his broom, and stepped back into the morning fog. Then the gates opened. A black SUV rolled to a halt. A decorated general stepped out stiff from old injuries, metals gleaming in the dawnlight. He froze, eyes locked on the janitor, and with a voice cracking under decades of memory, he whispered, "Captain Aaron Mitchell, is that really you?" In that instant, everything the soldiers thought they knew shattered, and the truth about the quiet man with the broom began to unfold. Every morning, just as the pale Nevada sun broke over the rooftops of Fort Lincoln, a familiar figure appeared near the east gate. Aaron Mitchell, 72 years old, weathered by time and something deeper no one could quite name. Clad in a faded canvas jacket and work boots with worn soles, he arrived precisely at Europe 45. Never late, never early. He never spoke, just swept. His broom, an old push broom with a splintered wooden handle, moved with steady rhythmic strokes. Not rushed, not lazy, but with a quiet precision that caught the eye if you paused long enough to notice. There was a method to how he worked. Left to right, curb to gate, sidewalks, gutters, even the dirt patches beside the chain-link fences. He moved like someone who used to give orders, but now took none. Most of the young soldiers didn't pay him any attention. Some gave him sideways glances, maybe a chuckle. "Base mascot," one joked once. Another muttered, "Probably thinks he's doing something important." They saw the gray beard that bent back the silence and assumed eccentricity or worse, irrelevance. Only a few treated him differently. Private First Class Jason Miller was one of them, a soft-spoken, second-generation soldier who was more observant than most. One chilly morning, he brought Mitchell a bottle of water. Another time, a hot coffee left quietly on a ledge. He never said much, just nodded, and Mitchell would return the nod, almost like a salute between ghosts. No one knew where the old man came from. He never entered the base, never crossed the yellow security line. He just swept and watched often, staring through the gates as if searching for something or someone on the other side. To the brass, he was harmless, a nuisance at worst. Nobody filed reports, nobody checked his name. Because really, what harm was a broom-wielding old man who showed up like clockwork, did more cleaning than the maintenance staff, and vanished before noon? But Jason saw something in him. Something about the posture, the way he stood when the flag was raised that hinted at a different story. A story no one had bothered to ask. And Mitchell, he never asked for a thing. Not food, not money, not thanks. He just swept and waited. Jason Miller didn't know what made him pay closer attention. Maybe it was the way the old man's eyes flicked up every time a military jeep rolled through the gate, or the subtle way he stiffened, not with fear, but with the reflexive posture of someone trained long ago to stand ready. Most soldiers brushed past without noticing, but Jason began to pick up on the patterns. It started one morning when the sun was still low and the bus hadn't yet lifted. Jason, on patrol near the eastern gate, paused to sip coffee and glanced over at Mitchell. The old man was standing perfectly still, broom in one hand, the other clutched around something, a small, worn photograph. Jason couldn't see the details, just the creased edges, soft from years of folding and unfolding. But what caught his eye even more was the distant, hollow look in Mitchell's face. Not sadness exactly, more like searching. Like a man trying to find a ghost he'd lost decades ago. A few days later, Jason noticed something else. A gust of wind blew Mitchell's jacket open as he leaned over to pick up a gum wrapper. And for the briefest moment, Jason spotted a faded name patch on the inside lining. A Mitchell. Jason's brain kicked into gear. Mitchell, the name scratched at a half memory from a training session months ago, an old debriefing case study the sergeants used to talk about lost heroes and unrecorded valor. One name in particular had stood out. Captain Aaron Mitchell, Special Recon, Unit presumed KIA during Operation Thunderline 1977. Deep in Southeast Asia, Operation classified. No body recovered. No funeral ever held. He didn't say anything at first, not to the others. But that night he pulled out his field notebook and scribbled down what he remembered. A Mitchell, 1977, Thunderline missing. The next morning, Jason casually brought it up in the barracks. "Hey, that old guy with the broom, Any of you ever think he might have served Corporal Davis? Laughed through a mouthful of protein bar. What, you think he's some kind of secret war hero? Bro, you've been watching too many movies. Sergeant Toller added, if he was a vet, he'd have VA benefits, not out here sweeping sidewalks in the cold. The rest chuckled and went back to their phones, but Jason didn't join in. That night, he went digging through old files at the base library, stuff most soldiers ignored. He found a brief reference to Thunderline in a dusty training archive. Extraction mission compromised. 7 survivors. Commander MIA. Name redacted. That was it, but Jason couldn't shake the thought. Why did the old man stand a little straighter when jeeps passed by? Why did he track officers with a silent gaze like he was waiting for one of them to recognize him? And most of all, why had nobody ever bothered to ask who he was? Jason didn't have answers, but something in his gut told him the man with the broom was more than just a quiet habit outside the gate. He was a chapter no one had finished reading. It began like any other morning. Aaron Mitchell arrived just before sunrise. Broom and hand jacket zipped against the wind. The eastern gate of Fort Lincoln looked the same concrete barriers 2 posted guards flag gently swaying overhead. But something had changed. A new base commander, Colonel David Rohr, had taken over that week. Young by military standards, efficient, strict, deeply committed to protocol. He came in with an initiative to tighten security. Civilians loitering near the perimeter, no matter how harmless, were now considered a liability. At a 600, sharp 2 MPs approached Aaron as he swept a path of wet leaves from the outer sidewalk. Their stance was respectful but firm. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the fence. One of them said, you're not authorized to be this close to the base entrance. Aaron looked up, eyes calm. I've been cleaning this stretch for years. We understand, but new orders are in place. No civilian presence past the yellow line. I'm afraid you'll have to leave. Aaron didn't argue. He simply nodded, leaned his broom against the fence, and bent to collect his things. A bucket of cleaning supplies, an old jacket folded neatly on the bench in a small weathered satchel. That's when it happened. As he lifted the satchel, the zipper snagged on the edge of the bench. A metal box fell from the flap and hit the concrete with a sharp clatter. The lid popped open on impact. Everyone froze. Inside were objects that did not belong to a man forgotten by the system. A silver star dulled by time but unmistakable in shape and meaning. A frayed unit patch its edges singed the faded words barely legible Special Recon. Thunderline, and beneath it a small photograph crease, torn at the corners, showing 8 men in uniform standing before a helicopter in flames. Dust and fire hung in the background, frozen mid-motion. They were younger then, faces covered in soot and resolve on. One of the soldiers on duty, a logistics clerk named Rodriguez, stepped closer, eyes wide. Sir, I've seen that patch before. In a debriefing, that's Thunderline. That mission went sideways back in the 70s. They lost almost everyone. Jason Miller, standing just inside the guard post, heard the words and dropped his clipboard. He rushed out. Wait, what did you say? He asked, turning to Rodriguez. This guy, Rodriguez said, pointing to the photo. If this is who I think it is, that mission was classified. The commander never came back, presumed KIA. Jason's heart was pounding. He crouched next to Aaron, who was slowly closing the box with a kind of solemn grace. Jason locked eyes with him. Sir, were you Thunderline? Aaron didn't answer immediately. He looked past Jason toward the gate. His voice was low, quiet. Not everyone came home, but someone had to stay behind to make sure the others did. Jason stood up and ran. He didn't stop at the gate. He didn't wait for orders. He sprinted straight across the yard to headquarters, nearly knocking over 2 privates on the way. He burst through the admin office door. Captain Walters, I need to speak with you now. His captain looked up from her desk, startled. Miller, you better have a damn good reason for this. I do, he said breathlessly. I think we've been ignoring a living piece of military history. Back at the gate, Aaron gathered the metal box, brushed a bit of dirt off the silver star, and stood up. Across the base, phones were already ringing. In quiet rooms, names were being searched, and in one secure office, a general's aide was picking up the receiver, saying only, "You're going to want to see this in person, sir?" By late afternoon, word had spread like wildfire through Fort Lincoln. No official announcement had been made. No sirens or alerts. But the atmosphere shifted uneasy electric. Officers who never left their desks were suddenly at windows. MP radios buzzed with cryptic chatter. Something was happening. Then, without fanfare, a black SUV with government plates rolled quietly through the side entrance. No military escort, no flashing lights, no flags, just the unmistakable presence of power that needed no introduction. The vehicle stopped near the command buildings. The passenger door opened. Out stepped General Richard Hawthorne, tall, broad-shouldered despite his age. His right leg dragged slightly from an old injury, but his posture remained unshakable. Rows of medals adorned his green dress uniform. His face was lined not just with years, but with memory. Deep, heavy memory. No one had expected him. Not the colonel, not the aides, not the guards. He hadn't called ahead. He hadn't needed to. He walked past the line of saluting officers without a word, his eyes scanning the perimeter until they landed on a lone figure near the eastern gate. The man with the broom, Aaron Mitchell. The janitor looked up and time seemed to stop. Without hesitation, the general removed his cap slowly, deliberately, and held it against his chest. The wind caught the edge of the old photograph, still clutched in Aaron's hand. Hawthorne's voice cracked as he crossed the final steps between them. "You saved my life, Captain." He paused. "I thought you died with the rest." The clatter of tools dropped by a mechanic nearby echoed faintly. A young recruit lowered his phone. A group of officers near the mess hall stopped mid-step. The base fell silent. The two men stood face to face, one in polished command, the other in worn clothes and quiet humility. Two ends of a story no one had realized was unfinished. Aaron opened his mouth, his voice low and steady. "Not all of us made it, but I couldn't leave until I knew someone remembered." General Hawthorne's jaw tightened. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You were presumed dead, Operation Thunderline classified. Your name was etched on the wall at headquarters. I've saluted it more times than I can count." A small crowd had started to gather, unsure if they were witnessing a reprimand or a reunion. Soldiers whispered among themselves, "Is that who I think it is?" "No way, that guy, the janitor." But no one dared interrupt. Jason Miller stood at the edge of the crowd, heart pounding in his chest. This moment felt like something sacred. Hawthorne turned to face the onlookers, his voice now clear and commanding. Echoed across the square. "This man is not a janitor. He is Captain Aaron Mitchell, Special Recon Unit, presumed KIA during Operation Thunderline in 1907. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "He didn't die," Hawthorne continued. "He stayed behind to save us. Every breath I've taken since that day belongs to him." And with that, he did something no one expected. He stepped back and gave Captain Mitchell a full formal salute, the kind you give to legends. Around the square, one by one, soldiers straightened, young and old, privates and officers. And then, like a tide rolling in, they began to raise their hands in silent salute. Aaron said nothing, but his hand rose too, shaking slightly as he returned the gesture. And for the first time in decades, he was seen not as a man with a broom, but as a hero who had never stopped standing watch. The story that followed was one no one at Fort Lincoln had ever expected to hear. Not from an old man with a broom, and certainly not from the lips of a general. They sat together on a weathered bench near the base gates, Captain Aaron Mitchell and General Richard Hawthorne. The crowd kept their respectful distance, but no one left. Even the commanding officers waited in silence as if some long-buried truth had finally clawed its way to the surface. Mitchell's voice was calm, almost detached as he began. "It was April 1907, he said, staring toward the horizon. Thunderline wasn't supposed to go the way it did. They were sent into hostile jungle terrain. No maps, no guarantees. The mission was to extract 6 American prisoners from an enemy compound before dawn. Intelligence had assured them it was lightly guarded. That was wrong. The moment their boots hit the clearing, gunfire erupted from every direction. We fought our way in." Mitchell said the words dry like reading from an old letter. "Found the prisoners, got them out. But when we reached the evac point, the chopper took heavy fire. Mitchell had ordered everyone aboard. He'd been the last man standing between his team and the enemy. He'd laid down covering fire until the rotors lifted and the helicopter vanished over the ridge carrying General Hawthorne, then just a 23-year-old lieutenant. I got hit," Mitchell continued. "Fell down a ravine. The explosion from the second bird knocked me out cold. When he came to the jungle, was silent and then captured 2 years in isolation. No name, no records, barely any food. He had destroyed his ID tags during the OP, and the trauma, both physical and mental, left him disoriented for months. When he was finally recovered during a prisoner exchange, the army didn't recognize him. They had no idea who I was, he said, and honestly, neither did I. They sent me to a VA hospital under a different name, said I was a John Doe with military indicators. I wasn't in any condition to argue. It wasn't until years later, after wandering from job to job and recovering pieces of himself slowly, that full memory returned. But by then, it was too late. His unit had been disbanded. His status, presumed KIA, was enshrined in a forgotten file cabinet, and he had no family to speak of, no one to call. I didn't want to barge back in, Mitchell admitted. Didn't want applause, didn't want disbelief. I felt like I failed. Not everyone made it out. Instead, he settled near the only place that still felt like home, a military base. And each morning he watched the flag go up. He cleaned the walkway beneath it. And though no one noticed, he stood at attention during a relay every single day. I didn't want to parade, he said. I just wanted to make sure the place still stood, that the flag still flew. General Hawthorne, seated beside him, looked away to hide his emotion. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. You didn't fail anyone, Captain. You gave 7 of us a life we never would have had. Families, futures. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. The truth of Aaron Mitchell's past didn't come with fireworks or speeches. It came quietly, from the mouth of a man who had lived in silence for too long, and for the first time in decades, the Army listened. It didn't take long. Within 48 hours of General Hawthorne's visit, the Department of Defense verified the records. Cross-checks with old mission logs, handwriting samples, and medical files confirmed the truth. Captain Aaron Mitchell, once listed among the dead, was very much alive. A full formal ceremony was arranged at Fort Lincoln, one unlike any in recent memory. Rows of chairs were lined beneath the morning sun, filled with soldiers, officers, and civilians. Representatives from the Pentagon arrived. Veterans who had served under Mitchell traveled across states. News cameras lined the perimeter. Even national outlets picked up the story. Lost hero returns after 4 decades in silence. But Aaron Mitchell was nowhere near the podium. He stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, dressed not in uniform, though one had been tailored for him, but in the same simple clothes he wore every day. He watched the proceedings from a shadowed corner, hands clasped behind his back as if it was someone else they were honoring. One by one his medals were returned. The Silver Star for gallantry in action, the Purple Heart for wounds sustained in the line of duty, the Distinguished Service Cross for a mission no one dared attempt and no one thought could succeed. His name was officially removed from the KIA registry and reclassified as retired with honor. His back pay decades' worth was reinstated with interest. The department offered housing on any base, lifelong medical care, and access to every veteran's benefit denied to him for 40 years. When finally called to speak, Aaron approached the podium slowly. The crowd rose, but he held up a hand, no need for applause. I appreciate what's been done today. He began softly, voice calm but firm. But I didn't come back for medals. I didn't stay to be found. I just wanted to watch over the flag and make sure it never went unraised. A hush fell. I don't want a house. I don't need a title. I've had enough walls around me that for one lifetime. He paused, then looked directly at the base commander. What I'd like is permission to raise the flag each morning. Just that. Nothing more. The silence was broken by General Hawthorne, who stood slowly from the front row. He turned to the commander, then to the crowd. Captain Mitchell has earned the right to raise any flag on any base in this country. If he wants to serve, we should be honored to let him. The room burst into applause, but Aaron only nodded once and stepped down. In the days that followed, media outlets the base with interview requests, hoping to turn his story into headlines and specials. Mitchell declined them all. He had no interest in television or documentary shows. When asked why, he said, "If I'd wanted attention, I wouldn't have spent 40 years in silence." Instead, he returned to his routine. But now it was different. At 0600 sharp, the gates opened just a few minutes early each day, not for an officer's convoy, but for a man in a faded jacket carrying a flag under one arm and a broom in the other. The honor guard now stood beside him. A bugler from the bass band played each morning, and slowly the base began to understand some men don't seek recognition. They seek duty, the quiet kind that doesn't end with retirement or medals or applause. They serve because it's who they are. It began with just one child. A boy from the base housing area had wandered over to the flagpole one morning, still in his pajamas, clutching a toy truck in one hand and his father's hand in the other. He stood quietly watching Aaron Mitchell raise the American flag with steady, deliberate care. Each fold precise, each movement reverent. The boy didn't ask questions. He just stared wide-eyed, as if witnessing a ritual more sacred than anything he'd seen before. The next day, 3 children came. By the end of the month, a dozen gathered every morning, some in school uniforms, others in raincoats or wrapped in blankets. They called him Mr. Mitchell or Captain, depending on what their parents had told them. Aaron would greet them with a nod and a soft smile, then return to his task with quiet dignity. He never gave speeches, but over time, the children began to ask questions. "Why do you stand so still, sir? Were you really in a war? Do you miss your team?" Aaron answered only what mattered. Discipline matters most when no one's watching. Duty isn't what you're told to do, it's what you choose to do. And yes, I miss them every day. Word spread beyond Fort Lincoln. Cadets from nearby Silver Ridge Military Academy made the hour-long drive each weekend just to meet him. Many didn't approach, just stood at a distance, notebooks in hand, watching the way he folded the flag, the way he saluted alone, the way he picked up even the smallest litter near the pole. The Academy soon partnered with the Department of Defense to establish the Aaron Mitchell Ethics Library, a facility housing not just texts on military leadership, but also journals, letters, and case studies focused on the human side of service. It became a required stop for officer candidates before graduation. But Aaron's legacy didn't stop at a library. General Hawthorne, just before retiring from active duty, spearheaded the creation of the Mitchell Protocol, a set of reforms to prevent what happened to Aaron from ever happening again. The protocol mandated enhanced follow-ups on presumed KIA soldiers, especially those in classified operations. It required secondary ID methods in covert missions, mandated VA case reviews for unidentified veterans, and placed new responsibility on commanders to verify the reintegration of prisoners of war and MIA returnees. It was signed into policy in a quiet Pentagon conference room with Aaron's photograph placed beside the flag at the head of the table. Aaron never asked for any of this. When he learned of the changes, he simply said, "If it helps someone else find their way back home, that's enough." The base changed because of him. Morning flag raisings became a respected event. Duty rosters adjusted so more soldiers could attend. School buses stopped 5 minutes early so children could watch. Officers began citing his name during leadership briefings, not to inspire grandeur, but to remind them of the power of unseen sacrifice. Aaron never stood behind a podium. He never accepted honorary degrees or wrote memoirs. But in his quiet presence, something unshakable took root. He became the base's conscience. Its memory, its living reminder that some heroes aren't buried with trumpets or celebrated in textbooks. They walk among us broom in hand, flag at heart. And every morning at Fort Lincoln, as the anthem played and the stars and stripes rose into the sky, those who gathered knew they weren't just watching a flag go up. They were witnessing legacy in motion. In the years that followed the ceremony, Aaron Mitchell lived a quiet life just as he always had. He declined the base housing offered to him and instead chose a modest studio apartment in a quiet neighborhood 2 miles away. No luxuries, no plaques on the walls, a small bookshelf, a worn recliner, and a wooden case in the corner that held his broom and his folded uniform. Each morning before most of the base was awake, he walked the path he knew by heart. Same time, same route, same purpose. He continued raising the flag at Fort Lincoln every day. Rain or shine, snow or blistering desert heat, even on days when his joints ached or his breathing was labored, he never missed. And every morning the children still came. Soldiers still saluted. The chaplain often said that Aaron's quiet presence did more for morale than any policy or speech. On his 80th birthday, the base organized a simple gathering under the flagpole. No news crews, no media, just those who mattered. The gifts were humble and heartfelt. a hand-carved walking staff made by a wounded Marine from the base rehab unit, dozens of handwritten letters from military children filled with drawings and questions. Jason Miller, now a sergeant, read aloud a note signed by the entire morning watch. To the man who reminds us what service really means. We stand because you stood first. General Hawthorne, now retired, attended as well. When the two sat alone afterward, Aaron looked at him with quiet disbelief and said, "I never expected to be remembered." The general smiled and replied, "That was always your blind spot, Captain. You never understood how unforgettable you were." Aaron passed away peacefully 5 years later. No fanfare, no last words written down. Just an old soldier in his sleep hand resting on the staff by his bedside. The military funeral held in his honor drew hundreds of soldiers, veterans, cadetsies, children, and strangers who had only heard the story once but never forgot it. But the real tribute came the next morning. At exactly 600 hours, 7 American flags were raised simultaneously at 7 military bases across the country. Each flag was hoisted by a young soldier who had either met Aaron Mitchell in person or grown up hearing about him. Each folded flag was later presented to a local school, accompanied by a simple handwritten note. Heroism isn't about medals. It's about choices no one sees. The message was signed only a friend of Captain Aaron Mitchell. And so long after he was gone, the quiet man with the broom continued to teach, not through orders or glory, but by living a life of silent devotion. He had asked for no reward, but in the end, he became the standard by which others measured service. Look again at the janitor sweeping your school hallway, at the bus driver who never misses a stop, rain or shine, at the quiet man with the bent back sitting alone at the park folding a flag no one asked him to raise. He may have once stood in front of gunfire for you. Aaron Mitchell was never looking for recognition. He never asked for applause medals or even a salute. But through silent service, steady hands, and unwavering presence, he reminded us all that duty doesn't retire and honor doesn't fade with time. His broom was never just a tool. It was a symbol of what he still believed in. That every day, every person, every flag is worth caring for, even when no one's watching. If you've ever met someone like Aaron Mitchell, say thank you. It might be the only thanks they ever receive because not all heroes wear uniforms anymore. Some carry brooms, some walk alone, and some simply show up again and again because that's what integrity looks like. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever known someone like Aaron? Someone whose quiet strength shaped your life? Tell us in the comments your story matters too. And if this story moved you, helped you remember someone who deserved to be seen. Like, share, subscribe, because these aren't just stories, they're legacies. And together, we make sure no good person is ever forgotten again. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next